Okay, let's just dive right into this. Close your eyes for a second and picture the global economy. You've probably got a very specific map in your head, right? Well, what if I told you that the global economic order is undergoing a massive, from-the-ground-up restructuring? Like, the map of the future is going to look absolutely nothing like the world we live in today. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a massive question. Which country rules the economy in 2050? We're going to dig straight into the hard data from the IMF, the World Bank, and some deep, long-term projections to figure out exactly how the tectonic plates of global power are shifting beneath our feet.
For literally centuries, the global economic narrative was written by traditional Western powers. That was just the rulebook. But looking at the latest data, we really have to stop and ask ourselves, is the era of Western economic dominance actually over? I mean, we are witnessing an epic structural shift of power. We're talking a monumental pivot from the traditional West to the rapidly rising global South and East. But to truly understand where we're heading by 2050, we first kind of need to look at the incredibly unique economic landscape of the mid-2020s.
So, looking at the mid-2020s, we're dealing with what economists call a bifurcated hegemon. Fancy term, right? Basically, it just means global power is fundamentally split. On one side, the United States maintains its nominal financial dominance. We're talking an over $30 trillion valuation. But right on its heels, China has consolidated unparalleled control over physical and manufacturing supply chains, putting them in the lead for overall purchasing power. And then, wow, there's India. India is surging as the primary global growth engine, growing at a blistering 6.6%. Meanwhile, traditional powerhouses like Germany and Japan, they're sitting at growth rates of around 1%, maybe even lower. It's a completely divided picture.
Now, you might look at some of the short-term global growth bumps we saw in 2025 and think, hey, things are accelerating everywhere, but the data actually tells a completely different story. The modest upgrades we saw were really driven by transient macro shocks, things like a massive wave of trade front-loading, some temporary tariff impacts, and aggressive fiscal expansions. A prime example is that sweeping tax and spending package in the U.S. known as OBBO, or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. While these policies briefly propped up the numbers, giving us a little bit of a sugar rush, economists note that they were actually masking a much deeper, long-term structural slowdown across the globe.
So this brings us to a really critical crossroads. If short-term policies and wild currency fluctuations are distorting the picture, how do we actually measure the biggest economy? I mean, to accurately rank the heavyweights of 2050, we absolutely have to make sure we're playing by the right rules. And the answer to that is purchasing power parity, or PPP. Instead of just converting everything into US dollars at today's exchange rate, which can be super misleading, PPP reflects the actual cost of living. Think of it this way. How many haircuts or, how many apples can you actually buy with the exact same amount of money in New York versus Mumbai? It levels the playing field. It lets us compare apples to apples when looking at what a country actually produces and consumes on the ground.
Look, nominal GDP is fantastic if you're measuring global financial valuation and speculative capital. And let's be honest, that's a game the West has traditionally dominated. But PPP? PPP captures the massive, ground-level volume of real domestic markets. When we adjust for PPP, the immense physical purchasing power of these emerging giants suddenly reshapes our entire understanding of the global map. It's a total game changer.
Once we apply that PPP lens, an undeniable trend emerges. We are watching a tectonic shift play out between the E7, those are the 7 largest emerging markets, including powerhouses like China, India, Brazil, and Indonesia, and the traditional G7, the advanced economies like the US, the UK, Germany, and Japan. And guys, this isn't just some slight rebalancing. It is a fundamental structural changing of the guard.
And the crossover moment on the data is just staggering. If you track the projections out to 2050, the G7 economies continue to grow steadily, but slowly. But then you look at the E7, and it aggressively crosses and then completely outpaces the legacy powers. It's like watching a race where the underdog suddenly hits the turbo button. This is the exact mathematical moment where emerging markets systematically overtake the old guard to absolutely dominate global output.
So why exactly is this happening? Well, first off, advanced economies are simply maturing. They're settling into slower 1.5 to 2.5% long-term growth rates as their workforces age out. It's just a natural cycle. Meanwhile, emerging markets are maintaining these incredibly dynamic 4% plus growth paths. When you combine that with their massive population scale and the natural process of structural catch-up, rapidly adopting new technologies and building out infrastructure, the math just becomes inevitable. Which leads us directly to a truly staggering number. $61 trillion. Let that sink in for a second. According to long-term projections, that is the expected PPP-adjusted GDP of China by the year 2050. $61 trillion. It's a figure so massive it entirely redefines modern economics. We're talking tens of trillions of dollars larger than literally any single economy operating on the planet today. No contest.
And as India and China surge upward to claim this huge, dominating slice of the global pie, the United States and the European Union are facing a steady, undeniable decline in their relative share of world output. By the time we hit 2050, the convergence is striking. The entire center of global economic gravity will have shifted completely.
Okay, so here is the ultimate 2050 leaderboard. Let's look at the top spots. China takes number 1 for sure, and India is projected to push the US all the way down to number 3. But honestly, the real shocker here? Indonesia. Indonesia rises incredibly to become the 4th largest economy in the entire world, and they are followed right behind by Brazil and Mexico. Did you notice who's missing from that list? Yeah, traditional European powers have been completely displaced from the very top tier. Unbelievable, right? But when you actually take a step back, this ranking isn't really a new world order at all. It's more of a historical reversion. Analysts actually point out that this shift is essentially a return to the pre-industrial revolution era. You see, before the 1800s, massive population scale naturally dictated global economic weight, which meant China and India absolutely dominated global GDP back then too. So what we're seeing in 2050, it's really just a return to that historical norm.
But hold on, because here is the crucial plot twist. We know who the biggest economies will be, that's clear. But does the biggest economy actually mean the richest citizens? This is such a vital distinction because sheer national size on a map does not automatically equate to individual wealth on the ground. Not even close.
To measure individual wealth, we have to look at GDP per capita, basically taking the total national economic output and dividing it by the population. It's our best baseline proxy for measuring individual wealth and standard of living. And let me tell you, when we apply this metric, the 2050 story completely flips upside down. Let's look at the starting point. In 2025, individual wealth in the US hovered right around $90,000, and Germany was sitting around $74,000. Now compare that to the emerging giants, China at just over $29,000 and India under $12,000. It's a stark contrast. Advanced economies completely dwarf emerging markets in average individual purchasing power today. And here is the 2050 reality check. Emerging markets will absolutely see their middle classes rise, which is great, but the wealth gap remains vast. In fact, China's GDP per capita is projected to reach only about 42% of the US level. Because these incredible income advantages were built up over literally centuries, they aren't just going to disappear in a few decades. The average citizens in G7 nations are going to remain significantly wealthier, which ultimately keeps immense financial and global allocation influence firmly rooted in the West.
So, we are heading straight towards a highly bifurcated future, one defined by volume on one side and wealth on the other. The emerging E7 will absolutely, undeniably rule the world in terms of sheer production, domestic market size, and physical volume. But the traditional G7? They are going to maintain their firm grip on concentrated wealth and financial power.
The economic crown is essentially being split right in two. As production and volume move east and south, wealth and financial control are staying west. So it leaves us with one massive question to ponder. In 2050, would you rather live in the biggest economy or the richest? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer today, and we'll catch you on the next one.